The South African Revenue Services has collected over 519 billion rands as at the end of August against a target of 534 billion and thus being short of 15 billion rands. The institution is undergoing renewal following the tenure of the former Commissioner Tim Modise. SARS has also been embroiled in the rogue unit saga, which has affected its reputation. Edward Kieswetter will shortly talk to us about the issues threatening the SARS capacity and the country's financial well-being. And later, the Special Investigating Unit's head, Advocate Tim Modise, will explain the work of the newly established Special Tribunal that began its work this month. The SIU has referred more than 600 cases to the tribunal in order to recover over 14 billion rands that may have been lost due to corruption. Stay with us. The South African Revenue Services has been on a renewal program following the Judge Robert Nugent recommendations. SARS has been embroiled in controversies that apparently affected revenue collection, and this has serious implications to the country's budget. The SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter is my guest to address this and many other issues confronting SARS as we speak. Eddie, a pleasure to have you with us.
Nice to be with you,
on the program. This is your second stint as SARS, right?
Yep, I left about a decade ago and have put up my hand again this time to come and help.
And I start with that question because, you know, you're going there as somebody who has been at SARS before, but the second time around, a lot of controversy around your own appointment, leading to the former Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, filing a lawsuit against the economic freedom fighters, and matters now before the courts. But then the question becomes, I'm sure at some point you are asking yourself this question, why would the EFF be so concerned about me as to make the allegations that were made about you?
Well, you should ask those who are against my appointment, which goes beyond just the political party that you mentioned, why they are against the appointment. To this extent, and specifically, what interest are they protecting and whose interests are they advancing? Those are questions I believe should be asked of them directly.
And of course, those would yield answers that would help clarify why there would be concerns about you, the person.
Well, I think if they are truthful, which I doubt they would be, then it would be interesting to hear what they disclose as their true interest. Tim, our country is in trouble. On a daily basis, I am confronted by people who are in denial about state capture. I am confronted by people who are in denial about the incalculable damage and that SARS was caught up in the project of state capture. And every time someone denies it blatantly, and every time someone tells me, don't talk to me about Nugent, talk to him about your appointment and talk to me about other related issues, in my mind I ask the question, I wonder why this is such a big concern. And what does it truly mask? And whose interests are truly advanced?
Well, now, tell me, what did you find when you went back there this time around? Okay, because when you got there, already you had these Judge Nugent recommendations to deal with in any event. But obviously, as a leader of an organization, you make your own observations.
Sure, and that's very important. Yeah. Because the report is a document that is the conclusion of an intense process. But at its best, it is a version of what truly happened. My own experience in the first few weeks, when I literally visited our office, engaged with our staff, both at head office and in our regional offices and respective branches, the reality on the ground is significantly worse than what even the report depicts.
Really? I mean, what do you mean by that? significantly worse? What did you find? I mean...
in the sense that the Commission gives you a slice of events. It comes to its conclusion by interviewing a few numbers of people who were close enough in their view to the events. But SARS employs, and employed at the time, over 13,000 staff. And every single one of these staff members have been affected in one way or the other. And the extent of the trauma is not reflected in the report. The extent of a culture of fear and intimidation that has vested in the organization is not adequately reflected in the report. The incalculable cost that has been wreaked on the organization because of the dismantling of core capabilities, the removal of governance and risk management structures, the exodus of skills, the marginalization of competent and experienced people, the deliberate prosecution of people to get rid of them simply so that those who were then driving an agenda had access to the resources that drove that agenda. That damage is incalculable.
But you know, I mean, SARS plays a critical role, probably the critical role, in making sure that the state functions, because it collects taxes, right? The money that the state needs to operate as a functional democratic state. So if the capability to collect taxes is undermined in that sense, then the whole point of running a fully functioning democratic state is undermined as a consequence. So you say, from your observation, state capture exists and SARS was at the center of it. How so?
Well, so if you talk about state capture more broadly, it is clear that those who were caught up to advance the state capture project did not have the interests of South Africa at heart. They had a corrupt intent. It was to use the state, whether it's a state-owned enterprises, and remember, I also served as a non-executive director on one of the boards, and I had a ringside seat at the extent of the carefully crafted schemes and arrangements for one simple reason: to fleece money from the state and to serve the narrow interest of a few. And it is exactly the same at SARS. And I cannot sit here and pretend or come to any conclusion, intelligent conclusion, that those who were involved served the best interests of Africa. So you're quite right. If SARS, that is central to the functioning of the state, if we fail, our democracy fails. Mm-hmm. And what is a tragedy that ought to enrage us and collectively stand up against those who have perpetrated it, rather than factionalize our fight against each other, to say that what happened ought never to happen again. And so the tragedy for me, and what makes me, not as the Commissioner, but just as an ordinary South African, sad, is how we are not single-mindedly seeking to address and reverse the damage, but we are rather fighting each other on the margins about whether or not it happened.
But here's the point, and I know, especially, social media platforms in particular, people are battling to make sense of what state capture is, as you say, or the fight on the margins. But and as far as SARS is concerned, there's one issue that's raised repeatedly beyond what SARS does, beyond the competencies that you mentioned earlier on that still need to be fixed, that you say were damaged, and we'll talk about that in a moment, is this question of the rogue unit, which creates the impression that SARS itself is a corrupt organization. And of course, when people lose confidence in an institution such as SARS, then it leads to other complications when it comes to people having to comply with their obligations to the state, paying taxes and so forth. What is your understanding of the story, or your knowledge of this rogue unit thing, from your point of view? Just help us make sense of it.
I wish I could speak more openly about this, and the reason I can't is SARS is a party to action by public knowledge, by the public protection matters which are before the court, and I have served and continue to serve my input to that regard. But here are some questions that I think is worth reflecting on. The first is, at a time like this, as South Africans, would we not want a stronger SARS with the capability to conduct its work? We know it's common cause that we have illicit syndicates that are active in South Africa, whether you take the tobacco industry, and the matter you raise is very integrally linked to the tobacco industry, but other industry, the gold refining industry, the minerals industry, the clothing and textile. I can give you chapter and verse the extent of criminal non-compliance that we find. And so if you're a concerned South Africa, you would say give SARS more powers, give SARS more resources in order to execute their mandate and to collect the monies that is due to the state and to lock up, to ensure that those who perpetrate this are brought to book. Now, let me tell you what I'm clear about. Firstly, that the powers of SARS is clearly defined in law. It's not a matter of opinion. In terms of the Tax Administration Act and in terms of the Customs Administration Act, SARS is defined clear powers of under what circumstances it may collect information and intelligence, what means it can use to gather that information and intelligence, what it may do to collect and gather that information, and which parties it may engage to collect that information. Now, provided that SARS acts within that ambit, there can be no consideration of a unit that is illegal or unlawful. The action of SARS today speaks to those powers. And let me put this on the public record. If any taxpayer has specific information that in law, not in opinion, in law is demonstrated that it has gone beyond that power, SARS will have to own up to it. We will have to answer to it. It is not in our interest or in my interest as the Commissioner to, if an individual within SARS were to act outside of the law, it's a red card offence. We will not tolerate individuals who within SARS abuse their powers or step outside of the mandate of the law.
Just a brief response from you. Do you have a sense that the so-called rogue unit overstepped the mark at any given time, and that is why there will be so much concern and controversy around it?
It is a matter that is currently being reviewed. I have not seen any evidence that suggests that. And therefore I am saying is, to the extent that there may be evidence, if it is presented to me as the current Commissioner of SARS, I must use that evidence and act on it.
Edward Kieswetter is my guest. He's the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, and he's got a big job on his hands to collect the taxes. SARS is under-collecting at this time. As he says, core competencies have broken down within SARS. But we'll look at some specific things, so-called quick wins that he has achieved so far when we return.